Hi, it's Bill and Mellisa with Wandering Highlanders. This summer, my wife and I rented a cabin on the WWII and took an epic 17-night cruise across the Pacific to Hawaii. In this episode, I'm going to go on a deep submariners dive into the Submarine Museum at Pearl Harbor. This will not be normal WWII content, and I won't be talking about the ship at all during this video. This is my submariner's perspective on the Sub Museum and on the Bowfin. Stick with us and enjoy the video. Thanks for sticking with us. All right, just from the beginning, please give us a like and subscribe. It does help the channel for reals. We're getting pretty close to getting monetized, and that'd be kind of sweet if that could happen, right? I appreciate all of you who have joined in, who are following along, commenting, and really just becoming part of our journey. Now, if you were a bubblehead, if you were a veteran of any kind, let us know in the comments. I'd love to hear and see what other folks have done. And if you were a bubblehead, drop a note about what your rate was or what your rank was or your division that you were in. And let's just talk story one bubblehead to another. I'm also going to warn you guys, this is going to be a long video. I'm going to try to add chapters to make it easier for you to skip ahead. But this is a deep dive. Also, this is as much for me and for my family as it is for anyone else. And what I mean by that is I get a lot of questions from friends and family about life on the boat, about my past life. Obviously, I think you can understand the submarine service is the silent service. There is a lot that I cannot say because I was never there. It never happened. I signed the paperwork saying that it never existed, and I will hereby forget everything that I didn't do because I was never there. If I told you, I'd have to kill you, right? That old adage.
That's classified.
It's what?
It's classified. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
But this is that love letter to what I used to do, and it's sort of a memoir to my kids, to my eventual grandkids, about, hey, what did Bill do way back in the day, and what was it like? And obviously, you can probably understand that being, that submarine operations are classified, you have to dance around things a little bit and be very cautious about what you say. Fortunately, what they had at the Sub Museum gave me a lot of information and a lot of, guidance, at least on what I could realistically say without getting sent off to Fort Leavenworth and breaking big rocks into little rocks for the rest of my life. Okay? I do take my oath seriously, and knowing what may or may not be happening in the world, I would never want to violate that oath of conscience to my brethren submariners to give away current or potential or past operations that may or may not still be classified. Okay, so I had to get that out there, right? Just know this is me speaking from my heart, and if this video gets among the least amount of views, it's still recorded and there to pass along to my kids and grandkids. So with that, here's my story. Why did I become a submariner? Why did Bill become a bubblehead? And oh, by the way, I might as well pop into this because some people will call us submariners. I'm going to go right on the beginning of that. This is unscripted. To say submariner, well, a mariner is somebody who is a seaman, somebody that goes out on the oceans. To say the prefix sub generally denotes less than or less than worthy, and to me there is an implied less than worthy mariner. I'm a submariner. I served, past tense, on submarines, surface ships or targets. So let's kind of go into this. Why did I become a bubblehead? Well, my journey started in 3rd grade, believe it or not, and it was not towards submarining. I saw this stupid movie called Iron Eagle, absolutely horrible in terms of realism, right? But it had an epic soundtrack, and in that movie, the kid wanted to go to the USAFA, United States Air Force Academy. And that became my dream in life. I based everything in my life from third grade on until I graduated based on trying to go to USAFA. Doesn't mean I was successful, but I did get nominations to all 3 military academies, and I got accepted into CU Boulder's Air Force ROTC, but I did not get the scholarship. I didn't want to start life out with student loan debt, and so I went with my backup plan to my backup plan, which I had enlisted in the Navy's delayed enlistment program in the summer before my senior year. And so I joined that literally as a backup to my backup in case nothing else worked. And I wanted to have a solid plan for when I graduated high school. So lo and behold, in July of 1993, I head off to Orlando, Florida. Let me just say, Orlando in July, little miserable, right? I had just spent 4th of July in Estes Park, Colorado, where it snowed that night. And 3 days later, I'm in 90 plus degrees, 100% humidity, air so thick it literally made me want to vomit. And I'm going to boot camp, baby. Yeah, pretty fun. Yeah, so that's how I had sort of done that. I go to boot camp, and interestingly enough, that's how I met my dear wife. Yes, that's right. She was also in the DEP program, and she was also from Denver, Colorado. But we were in 2 different cities, 2 different counties, 2 different school districts, and our lives basically never crossed except for once, and that is a sea story for another day. Okay? But, again, why did I become a bubblehead? It started with Tom Clancy. Gotta love Tom Clancy, right? The books, not even the movies, right? Hunt for Red October and Red Storm Rising. I read those books cover to cover, time and time again. And being that I'm a nerd and not exactly the most physically active Navy SEAL type, I in no way, shape, or form really was, going to be right for the Marines or even the Army. Certainly not a Navy SEAL type. And because my eyesight was so bad, I couldn't be aircrew on a helicopter. And, when I'm talking to the recruiter, and I took my ASVAB, and I scored a 99 on my first one in like my sophomore year, and then a 93 when I was at MEPS before my senior year. So I had my choice of any program in the Navy whatsoever. And, naturally, the recruiter says, wow, you'd be a perfect candidate for the Navy nuclear power program. And I'm like, well, tell me more. And they're like, it's the 3rd hardest school next to Harvard Law and MIT, and extremely hard school with a really high washout rate. Only the best of the best can get in. And then if you do that, you have incredibly good enlistment bonuses. And I'm like, ooh, cashy money, right? And I wanted to be on submarines. I wanted to do the closest thing to special forces, something unique, tip of the spear that a nerd can do, right? And this nuke thing really challenged probably my ego. I was great in math and science. You have to take this test called the NFQT, Nuclear Field Qualification Test, and I did plenty good on that. And so it seemed like the perfect fit. Lo and behold, of course, after I get to the boat, I find out that I really wish that I would have been smart enough to have failed out nuclear power school, become radioactive waste, get shipped off to Groton, and become a sonar tech or a fire control tech. And I say that because later on when I tell you about things, I actually loved being a submariner. I loved tracking contacts. I loved the hunt. I loved the game. I just hated being a nuke. More importantly, the reality is, flat out, I was a crappy electrician. I'm a hella good operator, and I love standing throttlemen and AA, and I'll show you those jobs later. But when it came to if things blew up, broke, vaporized, or let out the magic blue smoke, I was the wrong person to fix that stuff. Luckily, I had a chief, love you, who was smart enough to make my group's RPPO, or Repair Parts Petty Officer, and I was really, really good at acquiring, keyword tricky phrase, acquiring spare parts. And I was really, really good at trend analysis, still am. And I was able to get and acquire tactically, legally, I'm not saying otherwise, But I am saying that I got us stocked up and ready to go for Westpac. And a lot of the stuff that I had prepared actually came in handy on that particular op. And that's as far as I can say. But hated being a nuke, loved being a submariner. And the other thing is that during those times, especially, it was in the nuke world, basically, if you showed any sign of being happy or having a good time in the engine room, they would give you all manner of flack for it. We had this silver shovel, a little coin. It was like, those little silver spoons that you buy at, for touristy crap. Well, if you ever said something remotely pro-Navy, they would hand you the silver shovel because you were a dig it. And that means like, I dig it, as in I dig this stuff, dig it with a shovel, right? And you did not want to get labeled a dig it. And if you had that silver shovel, you went out of your way to find somebody else having fun at being a nuke so that you could give them crap and give them that silver shovel and get it away from you. Ironically enough, after I left, on different Facebook groups, I found some of my former shipmates who were the most anti-dig it, who are absolutely proud of their submarine service. Some of them even re-enlisted, some of them did other things. And I do find it amusing, but it was a survival thing. Another unscripted thing, this is a funny thing, is we talked about the law of conservation of happiness. And what that means is when the boat goes down, when you shut the hatches and the boat submerges, the boat is a closed system and there is only so much happiness on board. We'll call it a unit of 100 units of happiness. And each person goes down on the boat with their 100 happiness. The only way for you to get additional happiness, matter cannot be generated, it can only be taken, or energy can only change forms, right? So the only way for you to get happiness was to take it away from other people. Not exactly a good Christian way of life, certainly not life-giving or affirming, but it was a method of survival. And yeah, so there was a lot of razzing each other. I won't say hazing. That was forbidden, verboten, frowned upon even during the Clinton era Navy, far more frowned upon than, the pre-tailhook days, the stories about the old days. Yeah, there was some good old-fashioned hazing back then. And I almost kind of wish that we had it. I think the military is actually losing a lot of its soul by not allowing some of that. Obviously, some of it went too far, and that's why you can't have nice things kind of thing. So yeah, I grew up wanting to join the military. A lot of it was, I grew up in a pretty not great environment. I needed to get the hell out of Dodge, and I needed to see the world. Obviously, you can tell by this channel, I love to travel. I love seeing the world. I have wanderlust. And this opened up a lot of things for me. And it was great. Additional stuff of why, right? What gets in a person's psyche? I've got a really good friend here in Indiana. He was a paratrooper, jumped out of airplanes. I've got crippling fears of heights that literally when I would be on a ladder inside the submarine, hundreds of feet underwater, but I'm looking down a ladder 3 stories tall, and I got vertigo and had to override my fears just to go down that ladder, right? Interestingly enough, and people always say this, Bill, I could never do it. I'm claustrophobic. Here's the crazy thing. I am too, to a point. There would be times that I would do maintenance on the boat and I'd have to shimmy my way into a place to do a particular piece of maintenance where it might take me 5 minutes of contortionism to get into that spot. And I knew flat out that if there was a casualty, if there was a fire or flooding, I was a dead man. Literally, unless I had somebody that could hook me up to a breathing device, I would be dead long before I could worm my way out of there. And I had to accept that every time I went into that position. And that was okay with me. I still got through it. I sometimes get claustrophobia in large groups of people. But living on a boat, no big deal, right? I could do that all day a week, no big deal. Very funny, the dichotomies, right? So kind of talk about submarine life and other inspirations. One thing I want to tell you about is a show that I found recently called Hell Below. We get it as part of Amazon. It's part of Paramount Plus. It is absolutely worth doing either the free trial or paying the subscription for a little bit. Watch Hell Below if you want to see the historical context of what the greats did on submarines. The stories there from the World War II era and the early parts of the Cold War are off the charts. Those guys are the legends upon whose shoulders every submariner stands. And my hat's off to those men. Here's some other books that I have to recommend, starting with the most recent one that came out called Submerged: Life on a Fast Attack Submarine in the Last Days of the Cold War by a gentleman named Henry Rausch. This book I have given away to practically every close friend and family member that I have because that author's story so closely parallels Melissa's and my journey as brand new on the boat, brand new married, going through qualifications, and the harassment, the hazing, the interesting personality types, and the interesting personality reactions that you can have when you're trapped on a boat for 2 months straight with interesting people from all over the world. That book goes into that in ways, A, that I never could, B, I never took notes, which you were heavily encouraged not to, and C, honestly, he does a better job telling the story, and even though it's a generation earlier than my experiences, dead nuts on. Also completely unscripted. The best movie about submarines ever on the history of the planet, ever, is not Das Boot. It is absolutely freaking not Crimson Tide. Come on. The best movie about boats? Down Periscope. Not at all for anything technical, right? Everything technical in that movie is completely wrong. Everything about sonar, radio, all that stuff, totally wrong. But the people, yes. I can pretty safely say I have gone to sea with every character type that you've seen in that movie, and at least the scuttlebutt on the wharf was one of the boats at Pearl when we were there. The XO, the executive officer, was so closely resembled the XO in that movie that he had that movie removed and refused to allow it to be shown on the boat because he was that much like that character. So, yeah, Down Periscope, love it. Okay, another book that came out while I was at Pearl is called Blind Man's Bluff: The Untold Story of American Submarine Espionage by Sontag and Drew. Now, when this book came out, I was still a pretty nubbly nub. I'd done a spec op, maybe two, special operation, those things that never happened, you were never there, it never existed. And I might have caught inklings of some of those shenanigans. I cannot believe to this day that that book was able to get published. It is super serious secret squirrel stuff. And if you want to read about some of the really wild, dangerous, black ops, dark rabbit hole-y type of stuff, that's a good book. Another good book that I read once upon a time was called The Silent War: Cold War Beneath the Sea by John Craven. Now, Craven was instrumental in those early operations. I believe he was involved in the Polaris program, if memory serves right. He was super, super deep in all of those Cold War ops. And if you're, according to my demographics on YouTube, part of that generation and you want to know about that secret squirrel stuff that happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that man's book will go into it in big ways. Far better than I could ever legally say. Another kind of back-to-back series of books. One is called Poopy Suits and Cowboy Boots, and the other are the Subtales stories, and there's a whole series of them. Those are original stories about life on boats. A lot of them are sea stories that were submitted by bubbleheads. And I'm going to call them the straight-up no-shers of those sea stories that veterans experienced. There are some stories in there that will have you in stitches. So there you go. Also, just as a side note, if you ever want to try your hand at submarining operations in the video game world, there's a video game called Cold Waters. You can take a 688 or 637 class sub into mock computer combat with the Soviets during a 1984 World War III against the Russians. I spent a lot of hours tracking Ivan, putting missiles and torpedoes into his convoys and fleets, and it's really good, but I'm going to warn you, it is not a typical video game. It is a simulator. It's got a steep learning curve, and it is rough to play, but oh, is it good. All right, next chapter. I'm going to call it Memories of a Nub and Being a Nub and Qualifying with Qual Cards. So when I walked into the museum, it instantly brought me back 30 years to 1995. I'm a brand new nub. I just graduated from nuclear power school in prototype, just got married, and then fly out to Yokosuka, Japan. I'm an EM2 SU, submarine unqualified, and I had just done my first major international flight, and I arrived with a group of sailors reporting from Pearl. Some were sea returnees, some other ones were nubs like me. Well, Bill, what's a nub? Well, a nub is a non-useful body. That means you don't have any dolphins on your chest. And again, we're all in uniforms, either dungarees or poopy suits, and you look at some guy's chest and you instantly know if he's got fish or doesn't have fish. If he has fish, he's qualified, he knows damage control, he knows operations, he knows what he's about. Anybody without dolphins on their chest literally is a oxygen wasting, freeloading waste of skin and serves no valuable purpose on the boat except to risk other people's lives until they're qualified. Yeah, you get handed a qualification card, which is practically your Bible. It is your life. And your first year on board will be absolutely consumed by getting your dolphins. Now this qual card, I found some images online that will give you an idea. But imagine a book, a little pamphlet thing that you put in your pocket, you keep with you at all times, and it walks through each system on the boat, or each department, fore and aft engineering, weapons, operations, the egg hanger stuff, all that type of thing. And inside of each thing, you have signatures or qualification lines that will describe, so you have to be able to, from memory, draw that system, whether it's the trim and drain system or this or that system or whatever system it is. You have to be able to explain, even as a nuke who works back aft, I have to be able to understand how the torpedoes operate and how the torpedo system moves to push that fish out of the boat. Why, right? Why is all this important? Well, it's because it's all about damage control and firefighting. You could be an 18-year-old snot-nosed seaman, fresh out of high school, barely went to sub school, and you're on the boat and you work up forward. You still have to understand what's important about fighting fires back in the engine room, because if you're a smoker and you're smoking back in Shaft Alley, you have to be able to understand how to do the right things anywhere in the boat, right? I worked back aft, but my rack was right outside the torpedo room. Obviously, you've got to be able to know that if there's a hydraulic rupture in the torpedo room and you wake up and you are assed out because you're tired and you got 2 hours of sleep, but there's a casualty and you stumble out of your berthing area, you have to know what actions to take to stop that hydraulic rupture, put out the fire, save the boat, right? Getting your dolphins is literally the singular most important thing to a bubblehead. You have to know every system, you have to know every component, all sorts of stuff like that. The qual card is your roadmap for everything. And on that, there are these signatures, and you have to report back on these signatures because it gets put on what's called a qual curve. And it's like a map of, time versus signatures. And over the course of that year, you have to get qualified by the end of that. If you don't, you can literally get kicked out of the sub fleet for failing to qualify. Bad juju, okay? So you have your ship systems, you have your watch stations. Up forward, the non-rates or the seamen, that sort of thing, a lot of times they'll start out by driving the boat and then being topside watch and that sort of thing. I was a nuke, so my first job was qualifying as auxiliary electrician aft, which is a roving watchstander in the engine room, and then shutdown electrical operator. You have to get qualified in an in-port duty station and an at-sea watch station. Getting those qualifications is so important because, like, when I got to the boat, my division was short. I was a nub. Not only do I not have dolphins on my chest, but I'm not qualified on that boat. Now, even at prototype, you get qualified on doing these things, but you have to prove your qualifications there. So you have to do all these evolutions just to get qualified those watch stations, because until I did qualify AEA, my division's guys were port and starboard, meaning 6 hours on, 6 hours off until I qualified. Do you think there was some incentive for them to get me qualified? Abso-frickin-lutely. Do you think they were pissed off if they saw me sleeping? Yep. Because they're 6 on, 6 off. I'm on an 18-hour day. In theory, I got more sleep than they did, and they let me know it. And that is just part of life on the boat, right? So getting your quals and your dolphins, it's important because literally everybody on board, their lives depend on it. Now, it doesn't mean that you're an expert at every system. I couldn't operate the torpedo room. I couldn't, launch a fish, but I certainly knew my way around the room well enough to do the damage control and the firefighting. And really, that's what's most important. Okay? Now, back then, the surface fleet didn't really require everybody to get their water wings. I don't know if they do now. I think it's a little bit more encouraged now. But I will tell you that on a boat, dolphins are literally a matter of life and death, and they're everything. I like to tell my kids this just to put things in perspective. And I found out the same even on the cruise ship. The ocean will try to unalive you on a good day. This is immensely magnified with every foot that you go down on a boat, because the deeper that you go, the more water pressure there is, the more that water wants to get into the people tank, and we really don't want excess water in the people tank. It does very bad things. If somebody is delinquent in quals, anybody that doesn't have or that is dink, they are hazed or reprimanded severely. Okay, you do not want to get on the dink list, because it's basically like saying, hey, guys, my sleep time, my rack time, my liberty time, my time cuddled up with my wife at home, all that is more important than your safety and the safety of everybody on board. So if you were on that dink list, you were catching all manner of flack, and you try not to do it. I only did it maybe once or twice. And yeah, bad juju. But submarine qualification process is what bonds submariners together literally like nothing else that I've ever seen really anywhere. Nothing in the civilian world even remotely compares. And I think it is that bond of both the difficulty in getting your fish and in the immense magnitude and weight of the water above you, knowing how much the ocean wants to unalive you. Yeah, somebody's got those dolphins, they've been to hell and back, they worked their posterior off and they paid the price, and that makes that bond universal. I am going to give one tiny little shout out to one of my skippers, Johnny C. Skipper, you were amazing. I would follow you to hell and back. We all said it. Maybe some of my other skippers, not so much. Other department heads, hell yes. But I had one skipper who we knew that if things ever lit off, oh yeah, it was on and we'd have a good time doing it. And he was just a great leader of men. So miss you, Skipper. All right, let's go into the museum and check it out. Yes, I talked a lot before I even got into there. But again, like I said, this is sort of my memoir to my kids and my grandkids. And I really hope that you guys are enjoying this little walk down memory lane and what it's like to be a bubblehead. So I start off with this beautiful picture, classic picture of a First Flight 688 on the surface. That's really similar to both the New York City and the Buffalo. SSN 696, SSN 715, my first two boats. Then there's a montage mural of the submarine dolphins that says freedom isn't free. It's made up of photos of men who've given their lives on submarines. And it is a sobering reality that what we do costs blood, costs lives. Men have died doing this, and we must always honor their sacrifice and what they've done. From there, I went off to the right into the modern era, and they had a beautiful cross-section view of a 688 style boat. And you'll see that classic periscope that goes all the way from top to bottom, and also the newer, more modern scopes that don't even go through the hull. Really cool changes in technology. Also some models of a 688i doesn't have the Fairwater planes on the top of the sail, then a Seawolf and a Virginia class, to give you an idea what the scale of those boats are like. Then along the right-hand wall, you're going to see this great visual timeline of submarine operations from the Cold War into the future. My active duty service was 93 to 1999. And it was during that time period when folks were asking, do we even need submarines after the end of the Cold War? You really have to put yourself in perspective. The Berlin Wall had just recently gone down. Russia was changing its name, wasn't the USSR anymore. And they were wondering, was it worth it to keep spending this money and these resources? Obviously, the answer is yes, right? In a lot of ways, the world is more dangerous than it was during the heights of the Cold War, but submarine operations are still going on. What do they do? What can I say that they do? Well, a submarine is basically, especially a fast attack submarine, is there to seek and destroy enemy surface ships, enemy submarines, project power ashore. You've got Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, deploy special operations forces, do ISR, which is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Theoretically, you could support carrier operations or expeditionary strike battle groups, and theoretically do mine warfare or other such things. All of that is publicly available posted information. I can legally say that we went in excess of 25 knots submerged, 15 knots surfaced, and in excess of 600 feet. We did carry Mark 48 ADCAP torpedoes, Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, and Harpoon anti-ship missiles. My second boat, the Buffalo, got hooked up with a thing called a dry deck shelter, which is this big clamshell thing that sat on the top of the boat. And it was an airlock that would allow SEALs to lock out and go out and do their thing that they never did because they were never there. And we wouldn't have to surface the boat because any form of detection is bad, right? So let's do a theoretical exercise that says that you're off the coast of Kirkplekistan and you need to let these SEALs or the Marine Force Recon go out and play games and have fun and loot and scoot and pop and do all that stuff. Well, if you didn't have a dry deck shelter, you might have to surface the boat, let those guys get out and inflate their little rafts, and then they go out to do their, unaliving or whatever things that they were doing, and we would submerge the boat, go back to a safe place, and wait for them to get done. Obviously, going to the surface is bad because now you can get picked up on radar. So the dry deck shelter allowed boats to do that without being spotted. There were two boats that did that. I forget the other one. Dallas? Don't remember. At any rate, there are two of us that got it. And I ended up getting off the Buffy while we were in dry dock at Pearl Harbor, getting that on. I've seen that the newer Virginia class already has that lockout chamber built in. Obviously, this is a whole lot more stealthy, less drag, better for everybody involved. And there have also been the 4 boomers, the missile submarines, that were converted to SSGNs. And I understand that they have whole components of space for SEALs to go out and do things because a boomer's just got so much more space. Okay, the next display made me laugh in ways that I didn't expect it to. And that was actually seeing a submariner's rack display. And why should I care? Well, a rack is the only place on board that you can call home or that you can be alone. There were 3 stacked above each other, 3 coffins on top of each other. I hated the middle rack, hard to get into. The bottom rack was great unless, let's say you're at an in-port time when guys have been drinking heavily and they're puking all over the place and it's hitting the deck and splattering into your rack. Yeah, not so much fun. I really preferred the top rack. You would grab the pipes in the overhead and literally lift yourself and then elevate your legs and then sort of levitate yourself into your rack. Worked on those ab muscles, and you had some more, maybe storage in those pipes than you had in the other places. As you can see, racks aren't really much bigger than a coffin, maybe smaller. I'm only 5'8", and at your foot of your rack, you'd have your laundry bag and a spare EAB. I'll get to EABs in a minute. But I would have times where, like, if I had laundry stuffed at the bottom of my rack, I would get the worst Charlie horses ever because, I'd try to move around a little bit and then my leg would hit that stuff at the bottom and I would just cramp up with just the worst god-awful Charlie horses. So that was a bit of fun. But you can see how little storage space that you had. So imagine you've got about 10 days of skivvies, shorts, socks, poopy suits, dungarees, maybe a couple pairs of civvies for when you are on liberty. Maybe you have to bring along a dress uniform, yada, yada. You can see how that fills up really, really fast. For personal things, about the most that any of us had were Walkmans, or really at that time it was Discmans. Again, this isn't digital media, right? So you had your small collection of CDs and whatever you had on board was what you had and that was it. This is even before the days of Kazaa and LimeWire and all that crap where you could burn your own great mix CDs. You literally had whatever you had purchased. Some people would bring books. There was a great book library on board, lending library type of thing. But what you brought was what you had. And if you were junior enough, or let's say you have SEALs or Force Recon on board, if you're E5 and below, you might have to hot rack, and I had to hot rack plenty of times. You're like, Bill, that sounds disgusting. It is. Imagine 3 guys sharing 2 bunks. You have to split your stuff amongst the different racks, and then when it's your time to go to bed, you're hopping in the rack that the guy had just gotten out of bed for because he's now on watch, and you're getting into his rack that's already warm, hence hot racking. It was critical that you take a shower before you get in the rack because you're sharing this bed with somebody else, really with 2 other people. And if somebody didn't maintain cleanliness, let's just say that we had some creative means to calibrate people into hygiene. It may or may not have involved things like fire hoses and scrub brushes. I'm not saying I've ever seen it done. I'm just saying that it was theoretically in the cards and the threat was real. So stay clean. Also a fun note, talking about racks. When I first reported to the New York City, brand new, night number 1, the first couple nights until I got assigned properly, they gave me a rack in the torpedo room. Literally, my bunk was a sheet of plywood, a tiny ass little thin foam mattress, a sheet, and a blanket, and I'm in the torpedo room, literally cuddled up next to a Tomahawk land attack missile on top of a Mark 48 torpedo. Not as much fun as cuddling up to your little redheaded wife back home, let me just tell you. And the most junior people on the boat had to be in the torpedo room. And so you can imagine for them, anytime you have to move weapons around or do evolutions, it doesn't matter if it's your rack time, your ass is getting racked out. So that was rough, but I did report to the boat as a E5. Rank Duff has its privileges, even if you're a nub. So I eventually got put into a little bit more decent berthing and went on with life. All right, this is what racks were like. The rack pan lifts up. We absolutely had those books. There's a good old poopy suit. And those were our rack curtains. And so that's as much depth as you had in your rack pan. And if you're hot racking, you had 2/3 of it amongst 2 racks, or really 1/3 of it spread out over 2 racks. You did not have a lot of space. And there were always pipes and stuff in the overhead if you were in the top rack. Also, there was a pan here that held your EAB, and so that would occupy even more real estate. Now, Bill, what's life like? An 18-hour day. And people ask me all the time, like, really, what is life like, Bill? What is it like? And I'm like, it is not a 24-hour day as what all of us wonderful people get to have up in the world of sunshine and roses and unicorns and shit. A submariner's day starts with on watch, off watch, rack time, on watch, off watch, rack time. So let's say that you start your day where you're going to be on the day shift. You get racked out, you have breakfast, and we'll just call it the 6 to 12 watch, okay? Then you get off watch, you have lunch, and then you're now off watch. It's now time for maintenance. It's time for working on qualifications, maybe training, whatever. And so that's from noon to 6, noon to 1800. Then your rack time is from 1800 to 2400. Now, qualifications can get in the way of that, all that type of stuff. But then you are back on watch from 0-100, 4 balls, to 0-600. Then your off watch is 06 to 12, and then your sleep time is 12 to 1800, and on and on and on. Well, you can imagine that's really rough on your body. There are meals served, for each one. Mid-rats is the one that you get at midnight, and that's usually leftovers from the rest of the day, and the least amount of effort, food. During the mid-watch, the cooks would be baking all the bread for the next day. And a lot of times there would be movie night in the crew's mess during the evening watch and during the midnight hours, but really you could only do that if you were qualified. And if you were spotted in crew's mess when there was a movie playing and you were anywhere close to dink, calibration commenced. Food was always excellent, but mid-rats are mid-rats, right? Life. So your sleep will also get wrecked because if you have to go to battle stations for any reason, or if there's training going on, or drills, anything like that will screw it up. And if it's your rack time and there are going to be drills, well, you get woken up because you're the monitors who are running the drill for the people that are on watch. So yeah, you might get 2 hours of sleep that day, and suck it up, buttercup, drive on. Back to the dink thing, qualifications. A lot of times you had to sacrifice your rack time because you might need a signature from a particular SME, subject matter expert, who was on watch during that time, who's like literally off on that off cycle from you, and you can only see that person when it's your rack time. Get your butt up, get the quals. So yeah, that's why seeing a rack brought back so many memories. Kind of funny. Speaking of memory lane, they had those little Skillcraft GI issue green books. We called those pocket brains. You took all manner of notes in those, and I peeked, and Granger sells them and Amazon sells them. So if you really want that trip down memory lane, get yourself a little pocket brain. Okay, I'm really excited because I get to add in some bonus sub-life stories, and I found this website while I was creating and adding B-roll and editing this video. And I'm excited because it lets me talk about some things that I didn't talk about at the Sub Museum, didn't talk about during first recording, but are really important parts of submarine life. And the first one is going to be, what was the longest time I ever spent underwater? This is the funniest part. My longest time was my first time at sea ever, was a 63-day spec op. That was a 63-day special operation. And what really clued me in on that is I found this great image of cans in the bottom of the berthing area. So to give you an idea of how did we pack our food, first of all, we did what's called a bucket brigade, where you hand things over, hand to hand, person to person, across the brow, down the sub, into the boat, and then you load all the cans. And first you load all the normal things in all the normal places. Then you load cans into the walkways and the decks. And all of those canned goods you load there, and then you put this green diamond deck on top of it to walk on. So that's how we kept food for that long at sea. The follow-up question you're going to ask me, Bill, is how did you stay sane? I grew up watching MASH, and I can tell you that the thing that we did is we did a lot of shenanigans that were absolutely worthy of MASH, because that's the only way that you can stay sane, is by pranking each other, harassing each other. And if you find any weakness in somebody whatsoever, then you needled them needlessly until they snapped, hit you, or until they got you back. And that was just a way of life. Next question is, how did we deal with trash? Well, we had this nifty device called the TDU, Trash Disposal Unit, and it was basically a torpedo tube pointed down the bottom of the boat, and you would load these things that you would roll into cans, and then you would stuff them full of trash, and then there was a hydraulic press that you would press and smash that trash down, and then you would add TDU weights onto it, or these heavy-duty weights, lead weights, because you can't have your trash floating to the surface, because that could get you caught and get you dead. So you use that TDU to get rid of your trash. Now, obviously, you could only do that in certain permissive places, and there may or may not have been times where you weren't allowed to dump trash, and we stored it in the engine room, and it stumped to high heaven. Next is, how do you use the bathroom? Well, the toilet, like everything on a submarine, there's a procedure to it. And so you have this big long-handled valve on the right. That's the ball valve that opens it up. And then there's a little green valve there that's your seawater flush. But it's very, very important for you to know that you cannot flush those toilets when you're blowing sanitary tanks overboard. Obviously, you have to pressurize those tanks to greater than seawater pressure, significantly greater. And there's a whole tag out procedure, or a whole procedure where they will lock these things down, but people still have to do bodily functions while you're doing this. So you just have to know not to open that ball valve. And if you do mistakenly open that ball valve, you will get the entire contents of that blackwater tank blown into your face, all over the head, over the bathroom, and you will singularly be responsible for cleaning that up. Nobody will like you on the boat, and you will no doubt have a nickname for the rest of your career that you didn't want to have. Next question is, what are the showers like? I really have to thank this website, Fair Winds and Following Seas. It's somebody's blog, and it really covers things well, better than I could find just about anywhere else. So it is at thetidesofhistory.com. So here's an image of a submarine shower, and you might not be able to see it, but up above here, there's a little valve there, because what you're going to do is you're going to turn on your water, and you are going to rapidly try to get it to a not scalding, not freezing temperature. You're going to wash your body down, and then you're going to turn that valve off, shutting the water off, and then you're going to soap down. Then once you're soaped and shampooed, then you're going to turn that ball valve back on, rinse yourself off. You're taking a submarine shower. You're going to rinse yourself off, and then you shut the valves, and you're done. This is called a sub shower, as opposed to a Hollywood shower, where you sit there for 5, 10, 15 minutes enjoying all that hot water. Why is it like this? Well, we only generate so much water on board, and fresh water is at a premium, so don't waste it. And they do ask the question, how is fresh water made on a submarine? There is an evaporator that takes seawater, converts it over to fresh water,
And through special magic and simple chemistry, you boil that water away, you get rid of the salt, and you've got fresh water. But a lot of that is used for other things. So yeah, there is a submarine shower. They're very small, and you are absolutely encouraged to take absolutely short showers. Sonar techs in particular were harassed for taking Hollywood showers, and us nukes rarely ever got long showers. Another thing, and I'll talk about this in other parts later, but here are the sound-powered phones, or called growlers. And so you're going to spin this dial around to wherever you're wanting to talk to. So if you want the engine room, you're going to put it on position 15. Here, this one is on 4, and that's just COSR, and I have no idea what COSR is. That is a term before me. But according to this, we're in the wardroom. And then when you want to dial that, first of all, you're going to pick up this phone out of the handle, and it's going to make a very specific sound. And then you're going to twist this knob, whoop, whoop, and that's going to make a noise, and it's going to actually generate the electricity, the piezo effect, and that is going to whoop on that speaker in the place that you've dialed it to. It is old school technology, as old school gets, but it works all the time, even when you lose power. And all of these jacks there are where you plug in the large headphone sets that you use when you're doing firefighting and casualties and other operations. And that is a submarine headset. Here on the right, that's the big headset that we would wear. And you get to learn how to use those things all the time. These lockers are all over the boat. They're just part of life. Let's see if I can get this to play, and let's listen to the growl. Yep, that's growling. This website really is fantastic. I'm going to give him super kudos and credits for this, because he's got some good stuff on there. And so feel free to dive into this website and go a little bit deeper. I also want to see if they show the alarms while we're here. So the 3 alarms that you're going to have are the general alarm, the diving alarm, collision alarm, and then there's also a power plant casualty alarm.
General quarters, all hands man your battle stations.
That is absolutely the sound that we had. Gotta love the dive alarm. And the last question is, what was it like for our washer and dryer? Well, we had 1 washer, 1 dryer on board. You used it in shifts. Each division had a certain time frame during the week that you were allotted to use it. And you absolutely had to watch out for the dryer and clean out the lint traps, because that was a constant source and danger of fires. And if you missed your laundry day for whatever reason, you could be using some nasty skivvies, or you'd have to finagle and horse trade and get in on some other divisions' laundry time, because that was a pretty tightly regulated thing. So I hope those extra bits on sub life kind of help round out the experience.
All right, I'd mentioned a thing called EABs. The EAB is this mask device that you put on with a hose, a regulator, and then a hose that plugs into these little ports everywhere. It's nothing like these fancy Scott Air packs or stuff that you might see today. This is old school as old school. There are these air banks filled with good breathable air, and in an emergency, you suck rubber, you plug into that thing, and now you can breathe. And it's very, very useful, but it's also difficult. So let's say, and this is part of your qualifications, right? You have to know the boat so well that you can walk from the torpedo room all the way back aft to the farthest end of the engine room, basically blindfolded with your EAB on. You take a deep breath, you disconnect, you walk along to the next place, plug in, take a breath, deep breath, move along, and you do that from one end of the boat to the other. In an emergency, you might have a whole bunch of people stacked up together, and you might fill up all the manifolds in the area, so then you could plug in and buddy breathe off of somebody else. Now you have two people sharing the same amount of oxygen, and God help you if your buddy Blue Falcons you and disconnects without warning you because suddenly you have no air. That may or may not have happened occasionally. So you have to learn how to do this, communicate, and all of that stuff. So yeah, EABs, it was a big, big deal.
Console, not crazy, Ivan.
The next display that made me stop in my tracks was a passive sonar display. It was a lot of fun to go into it, put on or play the tones, hear the things, and do it. Okay, so here's an example of what the waterfall display was on the boat.
Still communications.
That's a very narrow, sharp tonal.
Vietnamese destroyer. Do that.
I bet that's biologics. Oh look, it's biologics. That's almost a transient. And that is probably screw sounds. Whale sounds. Yep, there's reading passive. Now, I'm going to warn you, Hollywood rarely ever gets this right. The closest, probably best thing is Hunt for Red October did show the waterfall display pretty decently. You have to understand, there are no windows on a submarine. So the only way that you know anything about the outside world is via passive sonar. You don't like to radiate with active, that whole ping, ding, ping, ding, that thing. You don't do that normally because you want to be stealthy. So listening is the only way that you know about threats that are around you. Of course, we have really good navigation and all that, but that waterfall display is life. And there's a really cool thing that you can do where you're watching the things, and the more that you learn, the more that you can identify based on what it looks like. Oh, is that biologics? Is that a noise transient? Or is that the screws of a boat or a ship? And one of my collateral duties as AEA was what's called plotting dots, where I would have to go from the engine room up into the control room during certain operations or during the maneuvering watch going to and from port, and I plotted dots. Now, this is very old school. Don't know if it still goes on, but basically it's a chart with time and degrees, and you're marking and plotting out where all the different contacts are that you're tracking. And it's all part of this trigonometry to figure out where's your boat, where's this noise source, potentially threat, and how do you put a weapon on them if needed. So I spent a lot of time up in the control room plotting dots. I was one of the few electricians that really, really enjoyed it, that whole Hunt for Red October and Red Storm Rising thing. So I kind of volunteered for that. And I loved doing it. I really should have just been smart enough and failed out of nuke school, become radioactive waste, got sent to Groton, and become a sonar tech or a fire control. I would have enjoyed it a lot more, probably would have even stayed in. That's what I get for being too proud and sticking through and graduating. Speaking of noise silencing, there was a cool bit of rubber anechoic hull covering. It's this rubber stuff on the outside of the boat. Pretty spiffy.
Release countermeasures. Emergency blow.
The next thing that really made me stop was the ballast control panel, or BCP. In all honesty, I was a bit surprised to see it, and it sure brought up a lot of memories. Now, I was a nuke. I never qualified chief of the watch, but I saw it in action all the time, right? This is the senior enlisted dude who's sitting there and he's got all the alarms and all the controls and all the things that move water back and forth across the boat. This is where, when the CO or the officer of the deck is giving orders, the chief of the watch is like a conductor operating all this stuff from there. And then off to his right are the panels and the stations where the two junior guys are, raising and lowering and making the boat go and all that type of thing. Usually the two most junior people there, ironically. But the person behind them, dive, that's really the most senior person in that whole zone. So you might have nubs driving the boat, but you have extremely seriously experienced people right behind them wrangling the whole symphony. And Yeah, so you'll pay attention to that, or next time you're watching a sub movie, you'll see that chief of the watch station. They really are controlling the life and breath of the survival of the boat.
All those sound-powered phones down there.
Yep, ballast control panel. This is hovering controls here. These are all your different pressures of different air banks. Okay, right above here would be the chicken switches. This is where you trimmed out your boat, raising, lowering your masts, radar, ECM, UHF, VLF, your bra 34, all of that. And then discharge, train, drain. This is where you can tell if you're rigged for dive. You basically control everything. And those are the old sound-powered phones. Made a very distinct sound when you put them in. Welcome to an old school BCP. The next thing that made me stop was stinky hoods. Do they stink or don't they? Bill, what are you talking about? Well, it's this thing called a stinky hood, named after its inventor, and it was a thing designed to help you escape from a sunken submarine. So let's say the boat goes down and you're in a relatively shallow part of the ocean, and it's this inflatable life jacket thing. So you go into the escape trunk. Doc will poke your eardrums and rupture them before you even go in, because they're going to rupture because of the pressure change anyways. You go yourself, they flood it out, and they pop the hatch, and you float your happy little butt up to the surface, and it gives you enough air to get you topside without dying. Yeah, that's what we had. It was a assisted buoyant ascent. And it was standard issue during the Cold War and beyond. From my research, they've replaced this with something called a submarine escape immersion equipment. Beautiful, so much better, because that thing actually might keep you warm in the water, because not everywhere is warm water. And you'd probably die from exposure long before you'd ever get rescued anyway. So, let's just say I had a bit of a fatalistic attitude when it came to death. Next thing was a display on boomers and fast attacks. All right, back then there were no SSGNs. That's the converted missile submarine that has Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles. There are 4 of them. They're beautiful. What a way to influence power around the world. The boomers are what carries nuclear missiles. Part of the deterrence triad. ICBMs on land, Buff, B-52, other aircraft that carried nuclear weapons. And back in the old days, there used to be aircraft 24/7, 365 flying around with nukes. And that's how we maintained the whole mutually assured destruction thing. But the boomers basically were our final thing to say, hey, USSR, you can't do a first strike because we can always second strike you from our boomers. Don't even try it. We will glass you all. Bye-bye, into the world as we know it. It worked, right? I am going to warn you, don't bother watching Crimson Tide unless you want a comedy. Ironically enough, I saw it before I went to the boat, thought it was great. Went to the boat, did a spec op. When I got off spec op, it was playing in Yokosuka at the base theater. A bunch of guys, we went and saw it on base, and we laughed our tails off the whole way through it at all of the things grossly incompetent and wrong in that. So, yeah. So, back to fast attack subs. I've kind of talked about it. ISR, we hunted boomers, we hunted submarines, we did things that never happened because we were never there. Also, to a submariner, there are 2 types of vessels in the water: submarines and targets. Submarines are threats. Anything on the surface is merely a target, something to put a torpedo into. I'm not saying there aren't threatening targets topside, but I am saying that we can usually hear them from a long, long way away. The next display literally stopped me in my tracks. My jaw hit the floor. I couldn't believe it. I was looking at the maneuvering watch stations. Now, maneuvering is this box back in the engine room. As a nuke, this is your world, okay? You have 3 watch stations, and they had declassified it, duh, right? Dumbed it down. But these were the panels that I had sat at. Throttleman on the left at the steam plant control panel. The middle one is the reactor plant control panel, where normally a electronics technician or reactor operator sits. But in port, I got qualified as shutdown reactor operator, and I spent many an hour sitting at that panel. Then the panel on the right, electric plant control panel. Maneuvering is this box. 3 enlisted guys, 1 officer in the back. He's called the EAL, or the engineering officer of the watch. He's the brains of the entire engine room, and this is the nerve center of the entire engine room. Everything is controlled from there. The mechanics, machinist mates have their watch stations all over the engine room, and there are a couple of roving watch standers, but this is where you control everything. Emergency controls, reactions, communications, yada, yada, yada. Now, for myself, I loved, if I couldn't stand AEA, I loved to stand throttleman. I even stood it when we went through the Panama Canal, had to get interviewed by the skipper to do that because it was a big freaking deal. Because you screw up at all, you dent the sonar dome or the screw, bad, bad juju. Throttleman was so much fun. If you can imagine the submarine as a fighter jet playing around angles and dangles and doing all that kind of cool stuff while you're evading torpedoes in training, obviously. And you go from a normal fat, dumb, and happy just tootling along to all head flank cavitate because there's a torpedo in the water and you're winging those wheels open and making that boat go. You've got your foot on the gas pedal of that boat, and it is literally you cranking the wheel, making that steam go, and you hear that whoosh of all that steam and feel all that power as the boat rumbles. Some of the most fun that you can have with your pants and short, boots on. That feeling of power was just off the charts. Yeah, angles and dangles, all that stuff. Good times. The RPCP reactor plant control panel, that was the senior person on in port. When the reactor shut down and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, your butt is sitting there keeping the reactor safe. If you screw up, you take out the city. So no stress. And let's just say that if you ever fall asleep, you want to talk about a career-ending event? Bad juju. But do know, there is an immense amount of training. We went through 2 years of some of the hardest schooling the military can give you. And we knew down to atomic theory what happened and why, and we could do the calculations to prove it. And the amount of sheer rote memorization and knowledge that we had was off the charts. So we were very well trained. We like to say we were so well trained that we could do it drunk and in our sleep. Not that I would ever condone being drunk and being on watch. I am just saying that when you've been up for 36 hours straight and you still have to operate things, yeah. All of that is designed to give you muscle memory so that you can do the right things in an emergency. And so when I stood there, you'll see me doing it. I could literally bring back the muscle memory, and I remember if I were to sit in a live engine room, I could probably take the emergency actions to this day, 25, 30 years later, just because of that muscle memory. It was pretty amazing. The electric plant control panel, this is pretty funny, but I sucked at it. You're controlling the distribution of the generators and power distribution, and you're doing damage control, and you've got the sound-powered phones on. It was not my strongest point, and I tried to avoid that watch station as much as possible, and there were other guys that were more than happy to take it. Ironically enough, I've learned since then that I may or may not have a bit of the TISM, and as part of TISM, there's a thing called auditory processing disorder, and that has symptoms like having difficulty understanding speech in noisy environments, mispronouncing sounds or words, sound localization, or difficulty following conversations or instructions, right? They'll say about somebody with autism and maybe ADHD, don't ever like give me verbal instructions, right? I need to see it. I need to have it written down. That's why I make training videos for a living. Well, imagine in one ear, you've got somebody giving you a damage report or talking to you in one ear, but in your other ear is the EOW giving you orders that you have to pass down to that watch station. And both of those things are entering your brain at the exact same time. This is why Bill wasn't a good EO. So yeah, I would much rather stand throttleman, or the job that I loved was AEA. Even though it was the most junior watch station, I loved wandering the engine room, keeping watch standers awake, getting them coffee, keeping them entertained, doing my logs, doing all that stuff. And as AEA, I loved it because you were the first person. If there was a casualty, your job was to run right at it, grab that right fire extinguisher, turn off the electrical power, put out the fire before it becomes a big, big deal. And that really became part of me to this day, where when there's an emergency, I'm the one running towards the fire, towards the emergency, not running away. It got dialed into me, maybe ADHD much. So yeah, at the panels, the other funny thing that just brought back the memories was seeing those sound-powered phones. First of all, you can whoop them, and I think you'll see me do that on the Bowfin. But the sound when you move that phone handle out of its handset just makes such a distinctive noise. I think that noise is ingrained into my DNA at this point. All right, guys, here is maneuvering. Steam plant control panel, reactor plant control panel, electric plant control panel. The big wheel is the forward throttles, little one is the astern throttles. I want you to hear a sound of a submarine right here. That's how you'd whoop people for your sound-powered phones. But this is maneuvering from a 688. Pretty wild. Haven't seen one of those in 26, 27 years. But that's where I stood, right there. So after geeking out in maneuvering, I turn around and boom, nuclear reactors for dummies. Yeah, again, this was really fun to see. A dumbed down, declassified explanation of a nuclear reactor. We had a SXG, pressurized water reactor, and I'm going to give you the best non-classified example, and we're going to use these as, guiding us through this. The reactor is just a hot rock. Its whole job is to boil water or to make water extremely hot. When you're pressurized, you can do it at higher temperatures. The physics work. And that heats up the whole primary coolant loop. Then you have these things called steam generators, and the hot water, the radioactive water is in the primary. The secondary system is completely clean. The steam generators help you transfer that energy into steam. Steam then goes back into the engine room, makes the turbines go roundy, roundy, roundy. That gives you electricity. Ship service turbine generators. And it also turns the turbines that make the screw go through a reduction gear, because turbines go really fast. There's not a lot of torque. You got to do some mathematical nerdy stuff in those reduction gears, converting all that high-speed energy into ultra-high torque stuff that makes the screw go roundy, roundy. And then you have this condenser thing that condenses that steam back to water. You pump that back up, and the secondary loop keeps on going. That's literally it. Hot rock, hot water, steamy, steamy, roundy, roundy, boat go, zappy, zappy electricity. Those are all technical approved terms. Now, in emergencies or during a reactor scram or whatever, you did have a ship's diesel generator. Obviously, you have to be on the surface or at periscope depth with a snorkel mast up, and you can run the diesel. And then there are batteries. And the batteries would also control a thing called the emergency propulsion motor. And then there was this cool little thing called the secondary propulsion motor. I spent many an hour at that. That's what you really put the nubs on, is the SPM or the EPM. So all of this, geez, I'm like an hour into this. We're finally over to World War II operations. After doing all that walking through the modern part, I looked at my watch and I'm like, crap, we're running out of time. So I did not have a lot of time to really dive into the World War half of the Sub Museum. I'm going to try to keep this brief because I think it's important for historical context to understand why was submarine operations in World War II so critical to our success. And this will delve straight into the walkthrough of the Bowfin. So let's take us back in time, December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy forever. The Japanese had just attacked us without warning, without provocation. And the battleship fleet is wrecked. The surface fleet is wrecked. Thank God the carriers didn't get hit. Thank God they were too stupid and didn't attack the oil tanks up on the hill. The only offensive arm that we had was submarines, outside of the Doolittle raid. Freaking amazing stuff. Great job, guys. But the only way that we had to take the fight to the Japanese was submarines. Now, this is rough because we had crappy torpedoes, and they cost a lot of lives. We were still learning what we were doing, but submarines were there to disrupt things. Let's put it in perspective. There's a thing called SLOC, Sea Lines of Communication. Well, on the map, the Japanese controlled the whole, Western Pacific, right? And they were taking stuff over by the day. They had just taken over Philippines, Wake, Guam, yada, yada, yada. They were working their way down to Australia. It was bad juju, for freedom-loving people. But Japan had a weakness. They are extremely resource poor. Oil, steel, rubber, food, outside of rice, right? They didn't have that stuff. And so to even make finished goods, they had to import it. And that's why they were taking over all this territory, was for them to get more things, to make more things to go boom, to take over more stuff, right? 90% plus of their crude oil came by sea. Basically, their entire wartime empire was only connected by shipping lanes, right? And they had a merchant fleet of about 6 million tons of ships to start with. This is what they were moving troops and supplies and critical resources. Now, later on in the war, the U.S. surface forces, and I would even say bomber fleet and whatever, the surface fleet definitely put a hamper on this later on in the war. But in the early days, the only way to knock that back was bubbleheads, submariners, the silent service. We were allowed to do what's called unrestricted submarine warfare. Well, what does that mean, Bill? That means if it had a meatball on it, if it was Japanese whatsoever, it was fair game. And this was brutal, and this was total war. And we could sink any Japanese or Axis-affiliated merchant ships, tankers. If it was shipping, kill it, wreck it, send it to the bottom. And you didn't have to do safe warnings or fair warning procedures. Well, by the end, we had effectively sunk their entire merchant fleet, right? Details can differ, but we put a hurting on it. Over 1,400 ships total. And I've seen numbers like 2346 merchantmen ship and warships and shipping estimates that were sunk. That's a lot. Another thing credited submariners with more than 50 to 55% of all Japanese merchant losses. Another thing that I saw said maybe 1/3, but it was a lot. And all of that was carrying those critical supplies. And they had started from shipping maybe 200 million or 20 million tons, 20 million tons a year in 1941 to virtually cut off by 1945. All of that played a huge impact in the land warfare, in the island hopping that the Marines and the Army did as they were going across the Pacific, Wake Island, Guadalcanal, Midway, all of that stuff. Well, the more that we can sink their oil, and this actually had the impact even to where they didn't have enough gasoline for their planes, hence kamikazes. Kind of crazy, but it was total war. That loss of shipping created fuel shortages, loss of raw materials and food, industry slowdowns, hardship on the civilians, strategic isolation, And even their coastal sea lanes were unsafe. Again, go back and watch Hell Below and see some of the crazy stuff that happened there. In fact, one boat committed the first special operations on Japanese soil, launched rockets onto Japanese soil, basically birthed the whole concept of SSGNs, missiles from subs onto land, and putting special forces troops on the ground, happening with submariners, U.S. submariners in World War II. But it came at a cost. 52 submarines were lost during the Pacific. 52 U.S. submarines were lost in World War II in the Pacific. 3,500 officers and men didn't return home. They're on forever patrol. The submarine service had a roughly 22% casualty rate amongst those participating in war patrols. This was the highest casualty rate by percentage of any U.S. service branch. There was a lot of blood that flowed to bring about those effects and the winning of the war in the Pacific. We had started the war with 111 boats, added 203 more during the war, so they had about 300 or so total, but 52 were lost. And that was through any enemy anti-submarine warfare, depth charges, patrol aircraft, escorts, enemy mines, and sadly, sometimes even getting hit by your own torpedoes. So this was taught to us as submariners. You can't walk around Pearl without seeing the memorials. And so if you ever get to tour a sub museum, you can also see my tour of the one in Muskegon, Michigan that I've toured. There's always that memory of those that served and lost their lives. And I still think about them because they gave that ultimate sacrifice, and I can put myself in their shoes. And I have just the utmost respect for what they did on those boats. So now that we are done inside the museum, we're going to move on to the bowfin outside. Now, when I walk through that, I'm going to leave that mostly with my talking through, but I want to give you some highlights on the bowfin to understand why they made her into a museum. What did she do that was so important? And it will give you an idea when you're seeing the different rooms and the berthing areas and the wardroom and the things on the walls, things will make more sense. So the bowfin was launched on 7th December 1942. She was often called the Pearl Harbor Avenger. She completed 9 war patrols during World War II. She claimed to have sunk 34 large vessels, plus 10 more under 500 tons, damaged others, and totaled up to 213,580 tons sunk or damaged. Post-war analysis credits them with sinking 16 vessels for 67,882 tons, plus 22 smaller craft. That's according to the National Park Service. In ranking, among the 188 U.S. submarines that are ranked, she ranked 17th in tonnage and 15th in the number of ships sunk. The bowfin earned the Presidential Unit Citation, the Navy Unit Commendation, and 8 battle stars for her World War II service. After World War II, she was acquired and turned into a museum there at Pearl, and in 1986 was designated as a National Historic Landmark. So with that, let's walk over to the boat, walk down with us, and see what it's like. I'm using a Insta360 camera that lets me kind of show things, so enjoy the tour as we go walkabout. You will see off over there the Arizona Memorial and the Missouri. Further off over here is where sub base is. So how does it feel to be back at Pearl?
Weird. I just remember that big long pier there is something similar to what you guys pull up to.
Well, that's where the carriers would pull into, this big pier here. Noko'oi shipyard back over there where the Buffalo went in for dry deck shelter. All right, we're clear. Oh, the hatches are almost clear.
Here, I'm gonna
I got
this, and you're gonna go down.
Just take that camera. I'll do this.
Okay.
So yes, this is even nicer than what I had. So imagine sleeping on top of one of those and curling up next to a torpedo when you go to bed at night. It's always fun. That would be an escape trunk. That's insane. Torpedoes.
Torpedoes?
Yeah.
Those things?
My first rack was on top of a Mark 48 next to a Tomahawk land attack missile.
Oh my gosh.
That's when I first got to my boat. That's where you slept. You cuddle up to one of those things and hope it don't go boom.
She's taking it Mach 4.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep, go for it.
Enjoy. What is that?
Okay, we got a head. All right, the infamous submariner head. Okay, so if you operate that wrong, you blow the sand tank in your face. So that little nozzle up top, you turn that, or the one on the back side. That's your seawater flush. You turn that off, and then this big handle here, you pull that down, and that's what flushes it. Now, you leave the water on when you're flushing, pull that valve back up, turn the water off.
It's been 26 years. Has it been?
Yes.
Yes?
And that's the size of a shower. So, you couldn't be as big as I am now to live here.
I think a lot of people have that problem. Come on, man.
They definitely weeded them out.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But, you know, you could be claustrophobic for sure.
Oh my gosh, this is freaking out.
This is home. This is smaller than what we had, but.
Dive on through.
So that's a urinal. That's your toilet. Right here.
Oh, lovely.
And if you do it wrong at the wrong time, you blow the black water tank into your face.
Oh, yum.
If they're pumping sanitaries overboard.
Oh,
You go first.
You can sit.
Open. Shut. Open. And it'll definitely be shut when I go through. All right, Liam, just FYI, like this kind of stuff, cutoffs, etc. All right, open, shut, open. Officer's galley.
This looks just like the other one we saw in Michigan.
In Michigan? Yeah, pretty much. This is the wardroom. This is where the officers eat. All Euro gamers. The exact same type of clocks that we had.
So, junior officer staterooms. This is the captain's stateroom. The only person with any quote-unquote privacy, if you can call it that. Have some keys. Yeoman's locker. Yeoman type 1 each. Okay, open. Shut. Open. Electric controls. BCB.
Polishing the bright work. Your job is to keep everything shiny.
Shut up, Stepansky.
That is our job, man.
All right, there's your engine order telegraph. Speeds. That's your rudder control? This is rudder control?
No, that is the steering wheel for the left and right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The one is the steering wheel.
That's your dive. That's your dive station.
Yes.
That's your rudder control. Your dive station. And the Christmas tree. Mm-hmm. So, rig for dive. Oh, this is.
This is what he did in the Navy. For years. I did other stuff. I'm a veteran. I'm a veteran. Most of the people think that he is. That happens, so don't say.
Oh, it's fine. So.
You're touching things,
Yeah,
though.
I know I am. It's rig for surface, rig for dive. That's how you keep track of it
You're
all.
fine. You're probably just gonna. We were about 100
Go on in.
pounds.
Thank you.
So I'm assuming y'all are active duty.
Yes, sir.
What do you do?
Air Force.
Right on.
We're outside at least.
Thanks. She was a crypto tech,
Oh.
and then I was a nuke electrician on fast attacks.
Oh, nice.
So, based her 30 years ago.
Yeah, basically it was a super boring job. Make it sound cool. Isn't that most jobs in the military?
It's like every job now.
Until it isn't. It's always boring until it isn't. Then it gets spicy. All right. I did 6 years, just an E5, and then I did 3 years Army National Guard. Got mobbed up for enduring freedom. Didn't like the Army much. Switched to Navy Reserve. Got sent to Kuwait.
Nice.
Because, you know, that's where you send a submariner. All right, radio room. All the secure comms in and out. I'm betting we're at the drain pump or the trim pump. Gyro compass. All right, there's your galley, guys. Imagine cooking for everybody in that little space right there. And for enlisted, this is where you eat. This is where you do all your meals. Well, let's put you up in the escape trunk, shall we? All right. Oh, no, can't pull it out. Can we? This is a growler. This is how you, yep, go for it, guys. So you select the station of who you want to call. You whip them there, and that will create electricity through the lines, and it will whoop on whatever station you send it to. wouldn't go sliding down that. That might hurt. So, if you can imagine all those racks down, this place full of sweating, snoring, farting men who haven't showered since they've gone to sea. And there's your wall walkers, aka pukas. And another head. And then imagine that you have to know what every valve, every power supply.
Two big eights. Is it 8 cylinders or 16s?
I don't remember.
I see 8. I just don't know what's on the other side.
I would assume the same.
Yeah, I think it's 2.
Ooh, watch your head.
Yeah, that's why they added it.
Mm-hmm.
Man, it would take a whole bunch of education figuring out all the valves, controlling all that purging fuel lines and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Generator controls. And of course, to get your dolphins, you have to know where every one of these is in your sleep. Lube oil purifiers. Request permission to shift, clean, and strain lube oil purifier number 1, shift to number 2.
I don't know if part of this is for generators and part of it is for...
Yes, to both.
They all 4 produce the same.
So if you look at the control panel back here, you'll see where they talk about the generators.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got, looks like 4 generators per.
Yeah.
And of course you can only run the jennies when you're on the surface or snorkeling. And so once you dive, you pull down the snorkel mask, you're on batteries the whole time.
I said that's on battery.
Yep.
The batteries can only last so long.
Yes.
The technology.
Well, and that was the hard part for these guys, why we shifted to nuclear, is because you could get held under, so when they're depth charging you and when they're up on the surface, they can hold you there till you run out of air, and then you have to pop up to the surface, or until you run out of battery, you have to pop to the roof, and then that's where they kill you. I believe the submarine service had the highest fatality rate of any branch of the service in World War II.
Yeah, you can see why. Power, heat sinks, all in your ship. That's a dangerous place to be, man.
That was my job.
Oh.
The electric panels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a dangerous place to be.
I would not want to walk into that room. Ours was a little more covered than that. That's enough to give me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, these big, the armatures right here.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, but
Why Alberta's coming through here?
No, I'm kind of the check valve on this. Wow.
it's amazing, isn't
It these guys at least had a head in the engine room. Why couldn't we?
I don't know. There you
Seriously, people. All right, here's your control room. This is basically maneuvering. That's just amazing.
torpedoes. That's amazing. Yeah, how did you go? I see, okay, so that's coming out here.
So aft torpedo room, so if you have a destroyer coming up behind you, or if you're getting away from the convoy, you can still lob a few fish their direction.
Wow.
And that, my friends, is the USS Bowfin.
I imagine you get rifle.
You doing all right? Well, what is that?
Oh, shit, doing your fancy damn camera.
It's not, it keeps me from breathing.
It's this?
Use your fingernails. Please. That guard the entire. Yeah, because I bet you they fucking hear like ring ring like every like 5 seconds.
Where are you going to be? I'm not trying to wet my camera.
You can look pretty.
No more.
Can you imagine being up here, operating the ship, operating the boat from here?
So now that you've seen the Bowfin, we'll wrap up the conversation about U.S. sub-operations in World War II and kind of beyond. The submarine campaign was probably the single most effective example of commerce interdiction literally in modern warfare, in modern naval history, right? A really small percentage of manpower and hardware inflicted crushing losses on their shipping, strangled it logistically, and really contributed decisively to the collapse of the Japanese war economy and to the Allied victory overall. It was extremely costly in terms of boats and lives, but the returns were massive. The men that did those operations shaped submarine doctrine for decades afterwards. Lessons on stealth, logistics, operational risk, the importance of targeting enemy shipping and supply lines, all of that is still relevant today, right? Thank God we haven't had to do anything like that, but the capabilities are there. All over the world today, the U.S. submarine fleet is out there. Just the hint of a U.S. submarine nearby can deter aggression. Just allowing a boat to pull into a port could be enough to let certain aggressor nations know we're nearby, and if they want to get froggy, we can get froggy right back with them. FAFO. And so every day, every night, those men and now women are standing their watches, protecting freedom and doing their jobs. And I hope and pray that their qualification process, their training regime is equally as stringent, equally as difficult, equally as brutal as what I went through, maybe even more. Because the cost of failure is inconceivable. You cannot screw up when you're operating a nuclear reactor. The ocean will try to unalive you on a good day. Doing certain operations may or may not be riskier than others, and they're still doing it. Young men, young women are leaving high school, graduating, and choosing to do this. And if they have fish on their chest, don't care what race, creed, color, religion, background, doesn't matter. If they got fish on their chest, they are a brother of the fin or a sister of the fin, and we're family. And as I wrap up and think about walking through there, I can't wait. I pray to God one day I can take all my kids through there and have more time than I did, because I'd love to dedicate a real day. If you're going to go there, please dedicate a lot of hours and go, see the Arizona, the Missouri, and the Sub Museum, and dedicate at least one full day, if not two. It can be exhausting, but it is so worth it. But really, and this is longer than anything, and if you stuck with me, thank you. I'm probably talking to myself by now, but there are a lot of people in the military that each do their own things, and I would never willingly jump out of an airplane, never be in good enough shape to be a Ranger or a SEAL. But the beauty of the U.S. military, and militaries in general, is that everybody finds their own particular type of crazy. I'm not crazy enough to be an infantryman. For reasons, I wasn't an officer, didn't go into the Air Force, I found my particular type of crazy, and I will be a bubblehead till the day I die. And those life lessons that I learned on the boat at 18, at 20, at 24, created me and made me who I am. And I'm grateful that that is still going on, because more than any other place I've seen on the planet, submarine life is, while both having a major caste system between the khakis and the blue shirts, the chiefs and the officers versus the enlisted, it's egalitarian. It doesn't matter who you are, what your background is. And other branches of the military can certainly be like this, but literally your life depends on every other person on board doing their job right 100% of the time, no questions asked, verbatim compliance with approved written procedures. All of that's what keeps you alive. And it's special. So I'm going to wrap this up with a poem, but let's enjoy The Night Before Christmas, submarine style. And with that, thanks for being with us on the journey. I hope to see you around as we continue to go around the Hawaiian Islands. And maybe, just maybe, we'll tell you about what we're doing after the WWII. So let's enjoy this Night Before Christmas, submarine style, by Sean Keck. 'Twas the night before Christmas, what no one could see, the men with dolphins were under the sea. Most of the crew was flat on their backs, snoring and dreaming, all snug in their racks. Those men on watch were making their rounds, some manning the planes or listening for sounds. Back in maneuvering or down in the room, they all hoped the oncoming watch would come soon. I'd finish some PMs whose time was now due and hope for some sleep, even an hour or two. Against better judgment, I took a short stroll and found myself wandering into control. The nav had the con, the cow was in place, the cob had the dive with a scowl on his face. The helm and the planes were relaxed but aware. The QM and ET were discussing a dare. To comply with the orders, the nav told the dive to bring up the boat with minimum rise. The orders were given, and soon they were there, at periscope depth, with a scope in the air. The QM confirmed our position with care. The broadcast was copied. We brought in some air. The nav on the scope let out a small cry. He shook his head twice, and he rubbed at his eyes. He looked once again to find what it was that interrupted his sweep and caused him to pause. Try as he might, there was nothing to see. So down went the scope and us to the deep. I asked what it was that caused his dismay. He sheepishly said, "I'm embarrassed to say." It could have been northern lights or a cloud, or a meteorite, he wondered aloud. But to tell you the truth, I guess I must say, whatever it was, it looked like a sleigh. And though it passed quickly and never was clear, I almost believe it was pulled by reindeer. We laughed and teased him, and I got up to go when our moment was broken by con radio. They told us a message was just coming in. We looked at the depth gauge and started to grin. Radio con, I feel safe to say, your attempt at a joke is too long delayed. If it had been sooner, it might have been neat, but I doubt we're receiving at 400 feet. Con radio, you come down and see. We're not playing games to any degree. I headed aft with nothing better to do, surprised the fact it was still coming through. It stopped and was sent to control to be read, but the nav read it slowly and scratched his head. Then again he began, this time aloud, to those that now waited, a curious crowd. To you denizens of the deep and men of the sea, who risk your life daily so others stay free. I rarely have you seen on this, my big night, for far too often you were hidden from sight. But purely by luck I saw you tonight, as your scope coaxed the plankton to glow in the night. And lucky for me, I finally won the chance to say thanks for all you have done. I know you miss your families at home, and sometimes you feel as if you're alone. But trust what I say, and I'll do what's right. I'll take something special to your families tonight. Along with the gifts I'll take to your kin, I'll visit their dreams and leave word within. They'll hear of your love and know you miss them. I'll tell you that soon you'll be home again. It might not be much, I know it is true, to thank you for all the things that you do. But I'll do what I can, and while you do what's right, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. And with that, fair winds and following seas, we hope to see you on the journey, and thanks for being with us on our journey.